It was one of the most remarkable elections this country's ever seen, with both Labour and the Tories having historically abysmal results. In last Thursday's European election, Nigel Farage's new Brexit Party topped the poll with nearly 32%, beating UKIP's 27% share achieved 5 years ago. And the Liberal Democrats came second with 20%, their best ever result in a European election. But what does it mean? Well, parties advocating a clean or no-deal Brexit, if you tot them up, got nearly 35%. And those advocating Remain got more than 40%, leaving only Labour and the Conservatives in the middle, who both officially in this election advocated a compromise, negotiated Brexit. Both of what we used to call the main parties will now come under huge pressure to pick a side. Here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
The Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage had a pre-result wish for the two main parties.
I hope they both do terribly.
What message does it
His wishes came true.
Who won the elections yesterday? The Brexit Party!
The Conservatives had the worst national election result ever. Nigel Farage said they'd breached their promise to deliver Brexit, and those vying to succeed Theresa May would be no better.
Do you remember all that stuff? Brexit means Brexit. Yeah. We're taking back control of our laws, our money and our borders. No deal's better than a bad deal. Well, I'd forgotten that. Thank you. And people did give them the benefit of the doubt. They didn't deliver, and the fact that a whole host of candidates are now saying the same thing doesn't mean that anyone's going to believe them. I have to tell you, I don't.
The Lib Dems soared to second place, gobbling up pro-Remain defectors from Labour. The Greens also picking up votes for their clear support for a second referendum. The Lib Dem leader, after years of defeats, a bit rusty on victory press conference protocol.
Congratulations. I'd like to say a few words to the national leader. We're clearly now a major national force again. And our next big task is to work with other people in other parties who are like-minded, initially to stop Britain crashing out of the European Union by accident.
One defeated Labour MEP said the rise of the pro-Remain parties had been a catastrophe for Labour.
I found myself being branded as a Brexit party, but actually being somebody who was not just pro-Remain but has been pro-public vote.
The Labour leader, who started the campaign saying he wanted to bring Leave and Remain voters together, is now under intense pressure from some in his party to back the Remain side.
Can I get from you today that you would stand to be a party that support Remain and support a second referendum?
What this party does is supports an agreement with the European Union to prevent crashing out, supports putting that proposal, when agreed, to a public vote.
Voting on Thursday in his North London constituency, Jeremy Corbyn would have found any number of deserters right behind him.
I held my nose and voted Lib Dem for Remain.
Held your nose?
Labour member. So, first time I've not voted Labour in 40 years.
They're so goddamn modelled on Brexit and that sort of taken over any other policies.
If Jeremy Corbyn doesn't turn around and now back a second referendum come what may, and identify as a pro-Remain party, will people make a move on him?
I don't think we're in that sort of situation. I think the party... No, I certainly don't think that's the case at the moment. I think people need to listen very carefully at the top of the leadership and in his senior team.
If he didn't have a million mouthpieces in all of you, then he wouldn't be standing here today licking his chops. The European...
The Brexit divide in politics hardened in these elections. Parties whose leaderships sought compromise suffered.
Politics. Let's have a proper discussion, but let's just keep the temperature down all round, and then we'll get through this.
Fair enough.
Look at the most pro-Brexit areas in England and Wales, and you can see how voting's polarised since the last European Parliament elections. Both Conservative and Labour share of the vote is sharply down in these seats from 5 years ago, but voting for hard Brexit parties, the Brexit Party itself and UKIP combined, is up 15%. For pro-Remain parties, the Lib Dems, Greens and Change UK, it's up 14%. In the most pro-Remain seats, you see a similar story. The Tory and Labour votes sharply down, pro-hard Brexit parties up, pro-Remain parties up hugely by 31%. Theresa May, who called for compromise as she stood down on Friday, tweeted, "It was a very disappointing night. But Labour also suffered big losses. She hoped these results would focus minds in Parliament.
What have you been hearing when you're out on the doorstep?
It's probably the single most common response I've got, and this is just me in the South East, has been, I would vote for you, but I'm not going to vote for Theresa May, and which leaves me thinking that had she announced her departure even 24 hours earlier, the result may have been a little bit more salvageable.
We cannot go on in a state of open revolt against our voters. Our voters want us to keep our promises to leave the European Union. And if that means we need to talk to Nigel Farage, then, well, we'll need to talk to him.
He's weighing up whether to run for number 10. The Home Secretary declared himself a candidate today.
As last night's results made all too clear, we must get on and deliver Brexit to ensure there's renewed trust in our democracy.
Both main parties have never known results as bad as these in a national election. A general election that might just reshape the log-jammed House of Commons can never have looked more terrifying. Well, are these results already having impact on the two main parties? There is a suspicion around tonight that Jeremy Corbyn may already have moved in the minutes, as it were, since those results. He's said that there will be a referendum on a deal, and people are wondering in the shadow cabinet, well, there didn't seem to be any consultation about this. Is it actually a change of policy? And some of them are saying, is it panic? Is it just being clever with words? Because, in fact, the chances of a deal have reduced significantly with Theresa May not being in number 10. One thing I am hearing tonight, though, is that there is an awful lot of chatter around the senior echelons of the Labour Party that there could be a move against Jeremy Corbyn's senior advisers. People like Seamus Milne, who some think have been holding Jeremy Corbyn back from a willingness to move over to the Remain side. As for the Tories, well, they're in limbo, obviously, leaderless. There will be even more pressure on the leadership candidates to be strident in their positions on Brexit and embrace the idea of no deal, potentially as soon as the end of October. And those Tory candidates, I suspect, will come under enormous pressure from MPs in Hastings to promise, pledge in blood there will not be an early general election after the horrible results for the Tory party last night. Well, a little earlier I caught up with the Brexit Party leader and I asked him what he made of those people who are totting up, as it were, the explicitly pro-Remain parties versus the explicitly hard Brexit parties, his own and UKIP, and saying that the pro-Remain ones seem to be ahead.
This is typical, isn't it? The Remainers never accept the result of any election or any referendum. The fact is, the Brexit parties had a very clear majority over the Remain party.
Are you including the Tories?
Well, of course, because that's their official policy.
But you said they're a sellout.
Well, but it's still Brexit, albeit Brexit in name only. But I'm quite sure there are many who voted for Remain parties who perhaps might not support a full United States of Europe. So these arguments can happen both ways. The fact is, this is just the usual, typical Alistair Campbell spin that is put on any result.
We've heard about the MPs round of the Tory leadership contest, then it goes to the activists. There's a new round now, isn't there, inserted into all of this. Someone's got to pass your sniff test.
Well, I think nearly all of them that are running, from what I can see, voted for Mrs May's new European treaty, despite, in some cases, having condemned it beforehand. The point here is about trust, and that isn't just for me. 108 times Mrs May told the country we were leaving on March the 29th.
You don't trust Boris Johnson?
Well, he voted for the treaty.
You don't trust Michael Gove?
He voted for the treaty.
You don't trust Dominic Raab?
He voted for the treaty.
So they're all goners before they've even got there.
Well,
they're going to say that they're
going to be redeemed in life.
They say they'll do what you've said you'll do.
They? Well, let's see.
That we will come out on October the 31st. Well, Dominic Raab has said that, and Boris Johnson has said that. Even if there isn't a deal.
This process has barely started. And we've been told a whole series of untruths by Conservative leaders over the course of the last couple of years. Why would anyone believe them?
Does any bit of you worry, as you look at the results of last night, to see a country that is polarised?
I worry about this, that for civilised democracy to actually function and to work, you have to have the loser's consent.
What would you have done if you'd lost the referendum originally in 2016? You would have started the campaign the next day.
No, there wouldn't even have been a debate about it. You know that, I know that.
You would have started the campaign the next day.
Of course not. There would have been no point.
The prospects said as much.
There would have been no point. No, I said there would be some not reconciled to it. I did say that. No, would I have wasted the next 20 years of my life? No. If the establishment had got the result it wanted, there'd be no debate about this
whatsoever. And that's a fact. Losers' consent is vital in democracy. And what we've had here are some very senior leading figures in this country outright refusing to accept the result of that referendum. And that is why we go on being a divided country.
So if these Tory candidates don't measure up as far as you're concerned, and a Tory government doesn't deliver Brexit on October the 31st, yes, deal or no deal, your party is going to start moving into preparations for a general election?
Absolutely. Absolutely, and we'll be fully prepared for it.
What would it be? What is your party? What does it stand for?
It's a party of radical political reform and change in this country.
But that could mean a million things.
Well, it means getting rid of the House of Lords. It means
changing that. That doesn't get very far, does it?
Don't underestimate the appetite out there in this country for changing the system. Don't underestimate the feeling that the two-party system now serves nothing but itself. And yes, we're going to talk about help for the regions. We're going to talk about 5.4 million people running small businesses, acting as sole traders. We'll talk about all those things.
Well, let me put it slightly differently, because you did particularly well, your party did particularly well in an area where they came out and danced in the street when Margaret Thatcher died.
That's a long time ago.
But have you got much?
It's a long time ago.
But you get my point. For those people who felt very bruised and were and hated the Thatcher era, some of your instincts are Thatcherite, and yet you're going to go out there and try and win those same voters.
I think you'll find politics has moved on. I think the country's moved on. I think
smaller state, bigger state.
The old left-right divisions are melting away.
But there are things like cutting taxes and spending money that don't go away.
People are re-identifying.
Which side are you on in that debate?
I tell you what's fascinating, and that's to see from last night's results where we had the biggest impact. That was in Wales and in the northeast of England, where we absolutely hammered the Labour vote. So I understand.
And where there are an awful lot of people dependent on the welfare state, but you probably want to cut it back. You always used to say you did.
Well, you don't know that, do you?
I'm asking.
You don't know that. Well, wait, all in good time. We are not 12 hours on from the results of a national election. We're going on to fight the Peterborough by-election next month. No party, none of the other parties yet have a platform for the next general election. We, as a party that is 6 weeks old, will develop ours.
Can you be deposed as leader in this party? Is it one of those parties where the leader can't be deposed?
At the moment, no. But
Can't be deposed.
It's a start-up. It's a start-up.
There are other scary words for parties like that.
Well, do you know what? Do you know what? Having had the misery of 26 years in a party run by its voluntary wing and seen its inability to take the right decisions, the Brexit Party is set up and is being run like a company. However, it's going to be a lot more democratic than all the other parties, because on these kind of policy questions that you're asking me right now, we're going to consult directly with our supporter base.
And what Nigel says won't be what goes.
I've got to listen to them. Without them, we can't exist.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Vince Cable's announcement on Friday that he'll quit as Lib Dem leader on the 23rd of July was somewhat overshadowed by Theresa May's tearful goodbye, but his party have just enjoyed their best ever European results, and he joins us now. How serious do you think the threat is of Nigel Farage in British electoral politics now?
Well, they haven't got any seats in Parliament unless they are able to capitalise very quickly on this particular result. They're probably unlikely to get there. But no, we have to take it seriously. It represents a substantial body of public opinion. In this campaign, I debated one-to-one with Nigel Farage. I do take him seriously. I take his party seriously and what they represent. But I think we will beat them. The forces of moderation will beat them, but we have to take them seriously.
But you accept he won? His party won today?
No, not at all. I think you started your commentary on these results. I think what the figures you cited were 9 million for Remain parties and 6 million for Brexit.
But he got 2 million more votes than your party?
He did indeed, and the Remain parties were divided on this issue, but no, together we did significantly better. I think I would be in reasonable grounds for saying that within the country as a whole, there is now a majority to stop Brexit and Remain.
Well, the 9 million figure is not against Brexit, it's against a no-deal Brexit.
Yes. Well, actually, the option of somewhere between the two has probably now disappeared. Theresa May was offering what she called a compromise. It's clear that not just can't get through Parliament, it's got no support in the country. We are now
so it is no deal or Remain,
we are
basically
faced with some fairly extreme options.
So what do all those people in the middle do now? Because there's been this failure in this campaign for you, the Greens, the Change UK, anybody else in that anti-Brexit camp to sort of get together. Should there be a merger now?
Well, not a merger, but there certainly needs to be collaboration. I'm very much up for that. We do work together in Parliament very well.
But you'd have electoral pacts, would you, at the general election? You would want that?
Not necessarily, but I don't completely rule it out.
Why not? I mean, isn't that the only way to win?
Well, the best way to win is to have a reformed political system and get away from first past the post. Now, we have had limited pacts in the past, and I don't rule that out. But
and you agree with Nigel Farage?
At the moment, our objective is to get as many seats as possible for the Liberal Democrats. But, you know, my whole approach in Parliament out is to work with people like-minded.
But I mean, Nigel Farage is in favour of proportional representation as well, isn't he?
Well, that may be one of the very few things where we agree.
Right, but I mean, it does raise the possibility of what kind of House of Commons we'd end up with if he's getting, you know, this sort of percentage of the vote.
Well, it is utterly wrong that my party should only have 2% of MPs, that there should be only one Green, and nobody from Mr Farage's outfit. That is utterly absurd, and we clearly have to move from that, even if it means bringing in people who are, you know, perhaps uncomfortable with.
How do you intend now, or your party, intend to stop a no-deal Brexit?
Well, I mean, we've been very clear in the House of Commons when votes have been held. I mean, the opposition parties, indeed Parliament as a whole, has voted against a no-deal Brexit. We now have the practical problem of preventing us sliding out by accident.
Because there doesn't need to be a vote for no deal.
Indeed. I think the crucial group of people, there's a group of Conservatives who clearly will not accept no-deal Brexit, I think led by the Chancellor. I don't know how courageous they're willing to be, but they're absolutely crucial. And I think it's very important that you know, opposition parties help them, work with them in order to get to the right position.
But the only way that can happen is in a vote of confidence at the moment, isn't it? So you're asking Conservative MPs, including the Chancellor of the Exchequer, to bring down the Conservative government in a vote of confidence?
Well, he indicated he didn't rule that out today. But anyway, that's a matter for them.
But is that the only way that you can stop a no-deal Brexit? Because it seems, you know, pretty dicey that you're going to persuade people like Philip Hammond to bring down a Conservative government.
Well, it clearly isn't the only way. In the previous session, attempts were made, I think on one occasion failed by one vote, to create a legislative framework within which the no-deal Brexit could be absolutely stopped.
So are you sure that's possible now?
Well, I'm not an expert on parliamentary procedure. There are people who know far more about this than I do. But there is clearly a will in Parliament as a whole to stop a no-deal Brexit happen. We've now got to look to the modalities.
And if you don't get a vote, you know, then what happens? You do think we can just crash out?
No,
we could have a Prime Minister who just wants to leave on October the 31st with no deal.
Well,
so, you know, how confident are you that you can stop it?
Well, I am confident because that is overwhelmingly the view in the House of Commons. It's the overwhelming view in the country. The practicalities of procedure, I cannot possibly imagine that the country will take this dramatic step against the views of the majority in Parliament and in the public just by accident. That would be an absolute travesty, and I think sensible people in different parties will now get together to stop that happening.
Vince Cable, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, in Wales, it was a dramatic night where Labour, currently in power in the Assembly and historically so dominant, were pushed into third place. The Brexit Party easily topped the poll with 32% of the vote. Plaid Cymru came second, leaving Labour back in third. The Conservatives only just pipped the Greens for fifth. Our Home Affairs correspondent, Andy Davis, is in Cardiff Bay. Andy.
Krish, a fortnight ago, the Brexit Party acquired 4 seats in the Welsh Assembly, originally won by UKIP. Last night, they took nearly all their votes. A case of UKIP in Wales routed, the Brexit Party triumphant. But it's what happened in second and third place which has made the elections here even more eye-catching. Because Plaid Cymru, the Welsh nationalists, had not beaten Labour in a Wales-wide poll in 94 years until last night. They pushed Labour into third place, and a distant third at that. Labour, who I should point out, other than on one other occasion, had not lost an election in a Wales-wide poll since 1918. So it's been seen as a hugely symbolic moment for Plaid Cymru, who ran on an avowedly pro-Remain ticket and whose leader, Adam Price, last night called it incredible.
Well, of course, it's a historic victory for Plaid Cymru, the first time that we've beaten Labour in a nationwide election in Wales in our 94-year history. And, you know, there's a very, very simple reason for that, because people were looking for leadership. There was a vacuum of leadership from the Labour Party, both in Wales under Mark Drakeford and under Jeremy Corbyn. And I think people in Wales that wanted desperately to send a message that we want to keep Wales in the heart of Europe found their voice in voting for Plaid Cymru.
So a big test for Plaid Cymru now to see if they can monopolise on this and try to wrestle power from Labour in the Assembly elections in 2 years' time. A big test also for the Lib Dems to see if this is the big comeback moment that they're desperate for. But many are arguing that the vote share last night, with the overtly pro-Remain parties outpolling the hard Brexit parties, means that Wales has now shifted from being a Leave country to a Remain country. That will be debated for some time. But what's undisputed is that this has been a massive setback for Welsh Labour, and it's already having an impact, because today the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, in what appears to be a significant shift of policy, issued a statement effectively declaring that Welsh Labour was now strongly supporting a second referendum.
Andy Davis. Now, Labour's position on Brexit seems to have done it few favours in Scotland. With nearly 38%, the SNP managed its highest ever European parliamentary vote. Labour's share didn't even make it into double figures, leaving the party fifth and with no MEPs there at all. Our Scotland correspondent Kieran Jenkins is in Glasgow now. Kieran.
Well, Glasgow, of course, once a Labour city, as Scotland was once a Labour country. So this result, extraordinary, and Labour sources are saying extraordinarily embarrassing. It was that bad. As you say, they lost both their MEPs. They now have none. Not a great election for the Scottish Conservatives either. They hung on to their seat but took a bit of a drubbing. And yet again, it was the parties with the clearest message on Brexit that were rewarded. So the Brexit party, not bad for them in Scotland. They got a seat. They came in second. The Lib Dems are back with a seat. But the SNP are again jubilant. They took 3 of the 6 seats. Their share of the popular vote in Scotland was higher even than the Brexit party's share of the vote across the UK. Here's their Westminster leader, Ian Blackford.
I'm absolutely delighted that the people of Scotland have shown the trust in the SNP. We've received just short of 38% of the vote. It's the biggest vote share of any party in Western Europe. What we said to the people of Scotland was a vote for the SNP was a vote to stop Brexit. I'm so delighted that people have rallied to that cause.
Well, this wasn't just a campaign fought on Brexit. The Scottish Conservatives tried to make this a vote on another independence referendum. Ruth Davidson might think that backfired. Her vote went down. The SNP's vote shot up. And you can see just how entrenched voters in Scotland are on the 2 big questions by these 2 statistics. 62% of people in Scotland voted for anti-Brexit parties in this election, the same as the Remain vote in 2016, and the pro-independence vote in this election was roughly the same as in 2014. So that gives Nicola Sturgeon something to chew over too.
Kieran Jenkins. Now, counting has recently finished in Northern Ireland, with 2 pro-Remain MEPs elected along with 1 pro-Brexit MEP. The DUP's Diana Dodd, who backed leaving the EU, retained her seat, while Naomi Long won a seat for the centrist Alliance Party for the first time. Martina Anderson also retained her seat for Sinn Féin. Roughly 57% of first preference votes were cast for Remain candidates. Well, one place that illustrates Labour's Brexit dilemma perfectly is in South Yorkshire. The area around the former mining town of Barnsley traditionally supported the Labour Party, but backed Brexit in the 2016 referendum. And that support for leaving the EU remained rock solid last night. Our North of England correspondent Claire Fallon reports.
Goldthorpe in South Yorkshire, a proud mining village until the 80s. Now to some, a symbol of the legacy of Thatcher's Britain. On these streets, they celebrated the death of the Prime Minister, who they blamed for what this place became. For decades, this was the Labour heartland. But 3 years ago, most voted Leave. And today, we struggle to find much love for the party that once had their loyalty here. How many years did you vote Labour?
About 50.
And in this election last week, you voted for the Brexit Party.
Yes.
Why?
Because I think we'll do better out of Europe.
I like Nigel Farage.
What do you like about him?
He talks a lot of common sense. He seems more for the people, really.
Nigel Farage seems more for the people than the Labour Party does.
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah.
Would you vote Labour now?
To be honest, at the moment in time, I don't feel like voting for any parties.
While we were filming, Ryan hollered down at us.
Do you want me to come down there?
They've all lost faith in Labour. A lot of people think Labour's moved to a middle-class party and they're not for working class no more with regards to the policies, and that's a lot of old school generation as well, from my parents, because I remember we felt miners' strike in '85 and Arthur Scargill and everything with Labour, what they did for people, and it seems now the policies have changed a hell of a lot with regards to drifted away from working class people and more like middle class people.
But last night, Labour weren't the only Brexit casualties. Across the north of England, it was a wipeout for the Tories, and for UKIP too. Their loss, the Brexit Party's gain. Votes also switching to the firm Leave sides. But after weeks insisting he would win, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, better known as Tommy Robinson, got 2.2% of the vote in the Northwest and lost his £5,000 deposit. Mr. Robinson, Channel 4 News. Here's the thing, outside just now. I'd really be grateful if you'd answer the question.
To Channel 4? You're the worst. You're absolutely the worst.
Outside
You completely lie. You're completely
now,
lying.
Mr. Robinson. Two people who were here to support you were giving Nazi salutes.
Of course they were. Of course they were.
They were?
Of course they were. Two people who were here to support me. Two probably paid agitators, which is exactly what we face everywhere we go. So in Channel 4 News, you're the worst for it. In fact, you film certain things with me, and then the headlines you run the complete opposite. So two people you've probably set up, or the establishment itself.
You think we paid people to give Nazi salutes outside? Not keen on our questions, the anti-Muslim candidate skulked out before the result had even been declared. While back in Yorkshire, an immigrant who became the mayor of Sheffield after moving here from Somalia as a child refugee proved the haters wrong, winning a seat for the Greens, while Labour slumped to 16%.
It goes to show that we are living in a polarised country, in all honesty, but I'm just going to continue being me. It's not going to change who I am, it's not going to change my message. And I mean, honestly, with every hateful message, there's 100 positive messages. So at times it can be easy to focus on the negative stuff, but for me, it's just trying to harness that love and positivity.
After the referendum, the politicians said they'd work to bridge the divide. 3 years on, from these results, it seems as big as ever.
Now, the EU Parliament elections were supposed to be swamped by a nationalist surge. But while many populist and hard-right parties did well, so too did Greens and Liberals. Matt Fry is in Brussels for us now. Matt.
Thanks, Chris. Welcome to Brussels. Quite a few politicians in Europe watched the results from behind the sofa, expecting the worst. In the end, it was a mixed, more nuanced bag. Message: status quo is so yesterday. Parties with clear, bold ideas on left, right and indeed even centre capture the imagination. The traditional beasts of the EU are feeling somewhat diminished. In France, Marine Le Pen's Rassemblement National Party topped the poll, just beating President Macron's En Marche. The Greens came third, with traditional centre-left and centre-right parties trailing badly. The Populist League Party beat expectations in Italy with 34% of the vote. But its coalition partner, the Five Star Movement, only managed third place behind the centre-left Democrats. Chancellor Merkel's CDU came first in Germany. The Greens took second, almost doubling their vote share and beating the left-of-centre SPD. The far-right AfD, on 11%, failed to make a big breakthrough. France is the battleground for the future of Europe, and Marine Le Pen's national rally lived up to its name. They came top, winning in their traditional strongholds, those parts of France that feel left behind and besieged by immigration and globalization.
Jordan Bardella, their 23-year-old leading candidate and poster boy, quite literally, was brought in to give the party yet another makeover. But the real power remains Marine Le Pen, who saw this election as personal payback for being defeated by President Macron 2 years ago. The two will continue to lock horns, the Europe of nation-states versus the Europe of an ever-closer union.
Greens, European Free Alliance, 67.
Elections are an expectation game, and here the Greens surpassed theirs. In a committee room bathed in their favourite colour, they greeted the results with giddy excitement. In Germany, Europe's industrial powerhouse, they're now the second party with 20%, which to one seasoned German Green MEP means that they now have to behave more like grown-ups.
You stop screaming now. I want to hear what he says, okay? You go outside or you stop screaming, okay?
In the forecourt, the mood was more earnest. This is the young generation that simply can't imagine their future outside the EU. But rather like the light display, they too are searching for the true meaning behind these elections. Inside, Margaret Vestager, the commissioner from Denmark, hated in Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C. for finding Google and Amazon billions in unpaid taxes. Her liberal faction also did better than expected, and she now has a real stab at becoming the new Jean-Claude Juncker. Everyone was expecting a right-wing, far right-wing surge. That hasn't really happened, with a couple of exceptions. Why?
Well, I think maybe people realized that something was at stake here, that actually the fundamentals, rule of law, freedom of press, equality, gender equality is threatened, and that we have so much to gain from working together. So why vote for a party that will actually not make the European Parliament work, but have the stated aim of wanting to destroy it from within?
Yes, some of the passionately pro-European parties, like the Liberals and the Greens, have done surprisingly well, but then so have some of the nationalist populists. They are the Eurosceptic Remainers. They don't want their own Brexit. They want to stay in the institution in order to hollow it out from within. They're the real challenge for the new leadership of this organisation. This is where the battle for the soul of Europe has only just begun.
Grazie, 9 milioni di volte grazie.
Back on Facebook, Matteo Salvini, Italy's Deputy Prime Minister and the Caesar of social media, thanked the 9 million who voted for him. In the last Euro elections, the Lega party got just 6% of the vote. They're now at 34%, a staggering rise for a politician who has bottled the mood of bruised national pride and small-town neglect.
Non solo la Lega è il primo partito in Italia, Marine Le Pen è il primo partito in Europa, in Francia Nigel Farage è il primo partito in Gran Bretagna, quindi Italia, Francia, Inghilterra, è il segno di un'Europa che cambia.
Of course, if Nigel Farage has his way, he and his cohort won't be occupying their parliamentary pigeonholes here beyond October. Back at home, they'll put pressure on the new Prime Minister to use no deal as a credible threat. Is that realistic?
But I don't know to whom that threat is directed, because what you have found on our side of the negotiating table is coherence, is unity, and a deal that's a good deal. It deals with the fundamentals: people, peace, and money.
So you wouldn't recommend a renegotiation of the deal, if that's what the British government demanded?
Of course not, because this is the deal, and better get things sorted so that we can get on with the negotiations about the future relationship.
With which country did the EU sign a trade deal October 2016?
Is it Canada?
Once upon a time, in the future, Brexit 2 will fill an entire quiz night of questions. And when we know the answers, we'll also know the shape of Britain, Europe and beyond. It could be quite a wait.
Well, with me here are Belgian MEP Philip Lamberts, whose party, the Greens, will now be the fourth force in the EU Parliament, and Hans-Olaf Henkel, a German MEP from the European Conservative and Reformist Group, which came fifth. Welcome to you both. Philip, let me start with you. You're also a member of the Brexit Steering Committee.
Yep.
if it's going to be Prime Minister Boris Johnson or indeed a Brexiteer that will lead the Tory party and therefore be the leader of the UK, they have said they will come back to Brussels with a threat of no deal to renegotiate the withdrawal agreement.
And I guess
is that an empty threat?
Well, I don't know what threat that is, because the constraints facing the British Prime Minister, whoever that is, will remain the same. I mean, the 27 will be insisting on keeping the integrity of the single market, and you have the constraints of the Good Friday Agreement. And, well, whoever occupies 10 Downing Street will face the same constraints. So if there's determination to step out of the European Union without any deal, fine. That will be damaging for the UK, for the European Union, both. Well, breaking the integrity of the single market would be even more damaging. And again, this is a calculus that many in the UK do not realise.
Right. Hans-Olaf, do you expect the UK now to crash out without a deal?
Well, let me first say that normally I don't agree with Mr. Lamberts, but in this particular case I do. I think Brexit is a lose-lose situation for both Britain and the UK. What is underestimated here is the effect it has on the European Union. And what is also not recognized here and admitted, that also the European Union had some responsibility for Brexit, because Britain was always an advocate for subsidiarity and for decentralization, and these people went into the opposite direction. So what I think the European Union can now do for whoever is the new Prime Minister is offer the British a new deal. So
is that going to happen?
Well, maybe finally these people agree that with the 73 British MEPs leaving this parliament, Europe is not going to be the same. It's not going to be competitive against the other regions in the world. We need the British.
Okay, what about the populist wave? Everyone expected the far right to do very well. They did quite well, and really quite well in Italy. In France, perhaps less so. In Germany, not so much.
No, and in Scandinavia they lost also, in the Netherlands as well. So, but in the Flanders, in my country, they won big time. So they will represent about a quarter of this parliament, which is quite a sizable contingent. But A, they are divided, and second, a quarter doesn't allow you to control the parliament. So I rest my case. I wouldn't say we should feel comfortable, because I'm not comfortable when so many people feel represented by that kind of political party. So we have our work cut out for us. Yet they will not be able to block the institution.
Are Greens populists? You're a Green?
I don't believe we are. I don't believe we are. We are pointing to dangers that have been announced by scientists for decades on end, and now there's scientific consensus that we need to do something serious about climate change, or climate change will put the existence of humanity at risk.
Okay.
Well, I disagree here, I must say. For me, there is some similarity in the tactics and the strategies of the Greens and the rightist populists.
Are you serious?
Yes, I'm serious. They do three things. Number one, they point to real problems Mr. Lamberts has. Number two, they blow them up, they create fear. And number three, and that makes it really similar, they come up very simplistic solutions. We need solutions which do not take care only of climate issues, but all the other issues which are connected, like what does it mean to employment, what does it mean to the rest of the world. And while I do agree that it is good to do something for climate, it is nonsense to think that a global problem can be solved only with a regional approach.
Philip,
I agree.
to respond briefly.
I agree that we need a global solution, but we need to do our part. And the big difference is that basically what is at stake is survival of humanity. Scientists are telling us that. I'm not telling that. I'm not happy to be in that situation, but we need to do something about it. It's about survival.
But with the Greens doing so well in Germany, is Angela Merkel's grand coalition in trouble because of the SPD?
Yes, she is in trouble, no question. The SPD has had a bad result. By the way, the CDU has had a bad result. I mean, imagine, here is this Spitzenkandidat from Germany who tries to get the support of everybody else. Yeah, but he made a colossal blunder in Germany. He lost 7 percentage points in his own country. You can say about Mr. Timmermans about at least one thing. He at least achieved a good result in his own country. Weber didn't.
Okay, got to leave it there. Hans-Olaf Henkel, Philip Lamberts, thank you very much indeed. So, of course, the big question that they'll be having to discuss here tomorrow is who exactly will end up leading these organisations here in Brussels? Back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Matt. Well, I'm joined now, or in a moment rather, by the Conservative MP Mark Francois, who opposed Theresa May's deal in every vote. But first, let's talk to Labour's international trade spokesman Barry Gardiner. They've both been speaking at the How the Light Gets In Philosophy Festival in Hay-on-Wye. Barry Gardiner, is your party's position on Brexit now evolving? Both Emily Thornberry and John McDonnell have backed a referendum in any circumstance.
Look, two Conservative Prime Ministers have now been forced to resign as a result of public votes on Europe. We listened to what the public said in the first referendum. We committed ourselves to trying to deliver that. We couldn't do that. Mark actually voted against the deal as well. And it proved impossible to get a deal through Parliament. Now we've listened to what the people have said yesterday, and we have listened to what the Conservative candidates are saying. They are all now going for a no-deal Brexit, it would seem, the likely candidates, and yet there will be no opportunity to negotiate with a commission until November. That is after the date on which we would have left the European Union. In those circumstances, we must deliver on the promise that we made at our party conference last year, and that is to stop a no deal at all costs. And the way of doing that, of course, is either through a second public vote, whether that's by a general election or whether it's through a second referendum. That's what we committed to then, and now is the time to deliver on that promise.
Do you agree with John McDonnell, who says a general election is now very unlikely? Turkeys don't vote for Christmas. The Tories aren't going to go for an election, so you are now in favour of a second referendum?
Well, indeed, but of course one has to recognise that we are the opposition and we can't introduce legislation into Parliament. We can only amend legislation that the government introduces. What we can do, of course, is we can initiate a vote of no confidence in the government, and we would obviously look to do that, but only at a point at which we believe it would be winnable. You heard Dominic Grieve on television the other evening saying that there would be circumstances in which he might support such a call for a vote of no confidence in the government if it were the case that we were headed for a no deal. Yeah. I think that is what is the most obvious way of achieving that, that second public view.
But if we don't get before we get to a confidence vote, is Labour now going to try and amend any legislation to try and get a second referendum with Remain as an option?
Indeed. Look, my view is very clear, and that is that now is the time to deliver on our conference promise that we made last year, and that is that if it was to stop a no deal, then of course, with all the caveats that we've been concerned about all the way along in terms of listening to the half of our fellow citizens that disagree with us, all the caveats about undermining democracy in this country, we cannot allow a no deal to happen. That's what we promised then. Now is the time to deliver on it.
There have been a lot of bar charts today in which we've been trying to work out which parties are for no deal and which parties are for Remain. Can we now put Labour in the Remain box? Are you now a Remain party?
We would be arguing to put this back to the country, either in a general election
but are you pro-Remain?
Or in a second public vote. And in that election, the alternative would be between no deal and Remain. We would support Remain against no deal.
So you are a Remain party now. Can you say that? I, Barry Gardiner, in the Labour Party, am now a Remain politician.
Sorry. You know, you like to trap people in forms of words.
I just want to know what you think.
I've set out the position, and I've told you, Christian, I've told you very clearly, we will fulfil the promise that we've made. We have, in all honesty, tried to negotiate a deal for Brexit because that's what we committed ourselves to doing. But we said we would oppose. That's the job of government. The job of the opposition is to oppose. But we oppose in the national interest.
Okay.
And we could not
I'm going to put you down for Remain. Is that okay?
The government to the right place. And for that reason, we now opt for a public vote. You may try and obfuscate that. We are saying we are now coming out for a public vote, as we promised to do in September last year.
Barry Gardiner, thank you very much indeed. Let me turn then to Mark Francois. What should your party's position now be? Is it right to think you are going to be a no-deal party very soon?
Well, Chris, welcome to a very, very soggy Hay on Wye. For one night only, I'm a wet Tory. In terms of our position, I think it's almost inconceivable now that whoever becomes the Conservative leader would not be determined to leave on the 31st of October. The public's palpable impatience with the fact we're nearly 3 years on from the referendum and we haven't left was absolutely clear in the ballot boxes last night. So we must leave.
So you want a no-deal party?
October, come hell or high water. Well, actually, what many of us in the ERG would like is a free trade agreement. So what we actually want is something akin to the EU-Canadian free trade agreement of 2016, so that we could trade with our EU partners with low or no tariffs to our mutual economic advantage, and we would base that on the existing agreement signed between the EU and Canada in 2016.
You can't do that by
probably
October,
add a security protocol. Well, hang on. Where there's sufficient political will, you can negotiate quickly. When Russia invaded the Ukraine, the EU signed a trade deal with the Ukraine within weeks. It all comes down to political will. If the EU realised we were absolutely serious, because the withdrawal agreement is dead, that's gone, that's absolutely in the hopper now. So we would prefer a free trade agreement rather than no deal. But we're not frightened to go through a brief period of no deal to get there. But the desired end state is not no deal, it's a free trade agreement.
Yeah, but the democratic position today is that 9 million people voted against no deal and only 6 million people voted for it. And we know that Parliament is overwhelmingly against no deal. So how are you going to get this through? You know, you're in the minority.
Well, look. Well, no, I'm not. 17.4 million people voted to leave the European Union. I've never been in the minority.
Not for no deal.
They voted to leave the European Union, and in Parliament, when MPs say, I don't want to crash out with no deal, that's code for, I never want to leave the European Union under any circumstances. I just haven't got the courage to say so.
Should there be a general election?
The default position is that we... wait 1 second, let me answer your previous question. The default position is that we leave on the 31st of October. There are only two things that can now prevent that happening. One is if we, the UK, request an extension to Article 50, because the EU can't impose that on us. We have to ask. You must have unanimity. And I don't believe any future Tory Prime Minister would ask for that.
Just in a few seconds, I'm sorry to rush you, but general election, yes or no?
I think at the moment, no. If Parliament continues to willfully obstruct leaving the EU, particularly after last night's results, which were palpably clear, it might be that at some point a Prime Minister would have no choice. But let's try and leave on the 31st of October with a free trade agreement and no deal if necessary.
Mark Francois, thank you very much. Barry Gardiner, thank you as well.